Naomi Pierce did not fall because she was careless. She fell because her brother pushed her in front of the greenhouse on the very night the entire family learned that the person they had always looked down on was the one holding the thing they wanted most. Naomi was 25 years old, the youngest daughter of the Pierce family, and she was used to walking into a room and immediately becoming invisible. That night, she returned to her grandmother's old inn in Charleston after the funeral, wearing a simple black dress, her hair still carrying the scent of sea wind, her eyes red from lack of sleep. From the outside, the house looked like an old painting. White walls, wooden balconies, camellia bushes leaning beneath the yellow lights. But inside, everything felt colder than a November night. The large dining room was packed with relatives, glasses touched, chairs scraped against the floor. Adults tried to speak softly, as if Eleanor's death was only a social event that needed to be handled with the right amount of ceremony. At the head of the table, Blake Pierce laughed as naturally as breathing. He was 30 years old, wearing a gray suit, his hair neatly combed, carrying the appearance of a man who was used to being trusted before he ever had to prove anything. Caroline, Naomi's mother, looked at her son with a softness Naomi had almost never received. She placed a hand on Blake's shoulder and told the people around her that at least the family still had someone strong enough to preserve the legacy. Martin, Naomi's father, only nodded, but that nod was enough for everyone to understand that he agreed. Naomi stood beside the door, her hand gripping the strap of her bag. No one asked if she had eaten, no one asked if she was all right. Aunt Vivian saw her and started to walk over, but Caroline called her away with a sentence so gentle and so sharp that Vivian stopped. Blake was the first person who truly noticed Naomi. He lifted his glass toward her, his smile stretching wider. "Naomi is here. Everyone be careful. There might be another accident tonight." A few people chuckled. No one laughed loudly, but no one told him to stop either. Naomi lowered her eyes. She had heard that kind of joke for years. When she dropped a plate, it was proof that she was clumsy. When she slipped at the dock, it was because she was careless. When her wrist turned purple after an argument with Blake, her mother said her brother had only joked a little too hard. Across the room, Diane Holloway sat beside her son, Noah. She was Naomi's future mother-in-law, always so polite that no one could accuse her of being cruel. Diane looked Naomi up and down, then spoke softly, just loud enough for a few people to hear. "Can a fragile girl like that really survive marriage?" Noah frowned, but before he could say anything, attorney Rachel Stone stood. She was a woman in her 60s, with short silver hair and a cream-colored folder in her hand. The entire room fell silent. Blake set his glass down. Caroline straightened her back. Martin folded his hands in front of him like a man preparing to sign a major contract. Rachel began reading the will. At first, there were small items: jewelry for Vivian, a collection of old photographs for a cousin, a sum of money for a longtime employee of the inn. Then Rachel's voice slowed. "The right to manage Whitmore House for the first 18 months after my death shall be given to Naomi Pierce." The air in the room changed instantly. Blake stopped smiling. Caroline snapped her head toward the attorney. Martin frowned as if he had just heard a typo. Naomi stood still. For a few seconds, she could not understand how that sentence had anything to do with her. Whitmore House was not just a house. It was family history. It was coastal land. It was a property worth millions of dollars. It was the thing Blake had spent years saying would belong to him one day. Caroline let out a short laugh. "You must have read that wrong." Rachel did not look at her. She continued reading. Eleanor had written that Naomi was the only person in the family who still remembered every room, every guest book, every old story of the inn. Naomi was the one who had sat beside her in her final months, recording the family history while everyone else only asked about land papers. Aunt Vivian raised a hand to her mouth. Grace Miller, Naomi's cousin-in-law, looked straight at Naomi. Something in her eyes caught between pity and alarm. Blake stood before the attorney had finished reading. His chair scraped hard against the floor. "Naomi, come outside. We need to talk." It was not an invitation. It was an order. Naomi knew she should not go, but her whole life had trained her to make everything quiet again. She followed Blake through the back hallway and out to the greenhouse where Eleanor had once grown white camellias. Sea wind slipped through the old glass panels, making a few of them tremble softly, as if someone were breathing behind her. Blake turned around too quickly. "Who do you think you are?" Naomi swallowed hard. "I did not know anything about this." He took one step closer. The charming look he wore in front of relatives disappeared, leaving only something hard and dark. "That old woman pitied you. But I will not let you ruin what belongs to me." Naomi stepped back. Her heel touched the edge of the stone step. She told Blake to move. She wanted to go back inside. He blocked the door, one hand pressed against the glass frame, his body covering the entire way out. "Tomorrow morning, you sign away the management rights." "No." The words slipped out of Naomi so quietly it almost dissolved into the wind. But Blake heard it. He looked at her as if an old doll had spoken back for the first time. She stepped to the side. He grabbed her wrist. Naomi pulled away. Her nails scraped against the sleeve of his jacket. Blake clenched his teeth, then shoved her hard. Naomi's body slammed into a stone planter. A sharp sound of breaking glass tore through the greenhouse. She fell onto the lower step, her shoulder striking the edge of the brick, her wrist slicing across a shard of glass. Blood spread quickly over her skin. Pain shot from her shoulder up into her neck, white, cold, and blinding. Inside the house, the sound of people running grew closer. Blake bent down before anyone arrived. His voice was very low. "You did this to yourself." Then he straightened, turning toward the door as Caroline rushed in. In a single breath, his face changed, shocked, worried. The poor older brother. She slipped. "I tried to catch her." Naomi opened her mouth, but the sound caught in her throat. Caroline looked at the blood, then at the broken glass, then toward the dining room where guests were beginning to gather. "Naomi," her mother said, her voice low and trembling with anger, not fear, "do not embarrass this family again." Martin stepped forward, looking at her like a problem that needed to be cleaned up before it spread. "No ambulance. It is just a cut." Grace pushed through the others and knelt beside Naomi. She touched Naomi's shoulder gently and saw how pale she had become, how violently she was shaking. Grace's eyes darkened. She was a nurse. She knew the difference between someone exaggerating and someone trying not to pass out from pain. "Naomi, can you hear me?" Naomi forced herself to nod. "My shoulder hurts. My head is spinning. I cannot stand up." Grace pulled out her phone. "You need emergency help." Martin shouted that no one was calling anyone. Caroline told Grace not to encourage Naomi's performance. Diane stood behind them with her arms crossed, whispering to Noah that this was exactly why she had been worried. But Grace did not lower the phone. She looked directly at Martin. "You can be angry with me later. Right now, I am calling an ambulance." When the siren rose from the coastal road outside, Naomi lay on the cold greenhouse floor, staring at the shards of glass reflecting the yellow light above her. Through the narrow gaps between the people standing around her, she saw Blake behind their mother, silently straightening the cuff of his sleeve. Then he smiled. No one else saw it, but Naomi did. And for the first time in her life, she understood that this fall might not be the end of her. It might be the thing that finally forced the whole family to look down at the place where she had been lying for years. In the ambulance, Naomi did not cry. She only stared at the cold white ceiling and wondered how a person could be in so much pain that her whole body trembled, yet still be afraid she was bothering someone. The paramedic asked if she felt nauseous, if her vision was blurry, if she remembered how she had fallen. Naomi heard every question as if it were rising from underwater. Caroline's voice was still in her ears, telling her not to embarrass the family. Martin's eyes were still there too, cold, as if she were only a broken object that needed to be cleared from the floor before the guests could see it. At the entrance to the emergency room, Blake had disappeared behind their parents. He had not ridden in the ambulance. He did not need to. In his mind, the story had already been written. A weak younger sister, a shocking will, a perfectly timed slip. Repeat it often enough, and people would believe it. The doctor assigned to Naomi was named Helen Morris. She looked to be in her 40s, her hair tied low, her voice calm, but her eyes missed nothing. When Grace described what she had seen in the greenhouse, Dr. Morris did not interrupt. She only looked at Naomi, then at the old bruise beneath her collarbone, the faint scar near her wrist, and the pale purple mark on her arm that her sleeve could not fully hide. "Naomi," the doctor asked slowly, "are all of these from tonight?" Naomi was about to say it was nothing. That sentence sat ready on her tongue like a reflex trained into her since childhood. But Grace stood in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes red with anger. For the first time, Naomi did not see anyone impatiently waiting for her to deny her own pain. "No," she said very softly. "Some of them are from before." Dr. Morris ordered scans of her shoulder, head, and chest. Caroline objected immediately from the hallway. She said Naomi had a history of anxiety, that her daughter tended to exaggerate everything, and that the family did not want to turn one small fall into a family drama story in front of the entire hospital. Martin added that every unnecessary expense would be reviewed. Dr. Morris did not argue. She only said that security would not allow family members back into the room if they continued pressuring the patient. That made Naomi turn her head toward her. No one in her family had ever used the word pressure. They called it concern, discipline, protecting the family name. The scan results came in close to dawn. Naomi lay in bed, her right hand bandaged, her left shoulder immobilized, her head aching in dull waves. Dr. Morris pulled a chair beside her. On the screen were gray and white images Naomi did not fully understand, but she understood the doctor's face. "You have a fractured collarbone and a mild concussion. But what concerns me more are the older signs." She pointed to the screen. A rib that had once cracked and healed on its own, an old injury in the wrist, a small misalignment in the shoulder, the kind that looked as if it had been pulled or struck hard more than once. None of it was new. None of it looked like the result of someone simply being clumsy from time to time. Naomi looked at the screen as if she were looking at a stranger. For years, she had thought her body had betrayed her, always aching at the wrong moments, always bruising in places she did not dare explain. But now, for the first time, her body was no longer silent. It was testifying. Dr. Morris lowered her voice. "Naomi, do you feel safe going home with your family?" That question opened a room in Naomi's memory that she had kept locked for years. She remembered being 12, when Blake locked her in the inn's cold storage room just because Eleanor had praised the way she folded towels. She remembered being 15, when he pushed her off the dock and told everyone she wanted attention. She remembered her high school graduation when he squeezed her wrist behind the kitchen because Eleanor had let her read the thank you speech in front of the guests. Every time Caroline said Blake was only joking. Every time Martin said Naomi was too sensitive. Every time Naomi learned to smile at relatives with one part of her body still hurting. Naomi had not answered yet when the door opened. Aunt Vivian stepped inside, her face pale, as if she had walked through a night longer than all the others before it. In her hands was a small wooden box, old and worn, with a tarnished brass lock. "Your grandmother left this for you," Vivian said. "She told me to give it to you only when the family tried to silence you again." Naomi looked at the box. Her heart beat harder than the pain in her shoulder. Vivian unlocked it. There was no jewelry inside, no money, only handwritten letters, old photographs, a few copies of documents, and a small recording that had been transferred onto a storage device. The first letter carried Eleanor's handwriting, shaky but clear. "If they call Naomi crazy, check what they are trying to take from her." Grace covered her mouth with one hand. In the stack of papers were photographs of Naomi at family gatherings, her hands bruised, her collar pulled high, her smile stiff. There were Eleanor's notes about the times Blake lost control. There were copies of emails showing that Blake had pushed Eleanor to sell Whitmore House before she died, and there was a clause in the will that Rachel Stone had not had time to finish reading the night before. Any family member who threatens, coerces, or harms Naomi in order to force her to give up management rights to the inn will lose all rights connected to the property. Naomi could not speak. She only looked at her grandmother's handwriting until tears spilled over, not because she was afraid, because of something even stranger. She had been believed. At that exact moment, Grace's phone rang. A former employee of the inn had sent a video from the hallway camera behind the greenhouse. The image was slightly blurred, the angle uneven, but it was clear enough. Blake blocked Naomi. Naomi stepped back. His hand shoved hard. Then she disappeared out of frame. The room went completely silent. Vivian sank into a chair as if her legs could no longer hold her. Grace looked at Naomi, then at Dr. Morris. The doctor did not need to ask anything else. She stepped out to call a social worker and the police. In the hallway, Caroline was telling someone that Naomi always knew how to turn herself into a victim. But inside the small hospital room, the story had changed direction. It was no longer a fall. No longer a weak girl. No longer a rumor inside a toxic family. It was evidence. It was hidden family truths. It was a hidden inheritance story that Eleanor had prepared before she died. And for the first time in her life, Naomi did not have to beg anyone to believe her. Caroline Pierce did not wait for the truth to be investigated. She struck first, like someone who was used to rewriting every story before anyone had the chance to see the real cracks inside it. The next morning, while Naomi was still lying in a hospital room with her shoulder immobilized and her wrist wrapped in white bandages, Caroline's post had already spread across social media. She wrote in the voice of a grieving mother. She said her youngest daughter had struggled for years with unstable emotions. She said the family had tried to love her, tried to help her, tried to be patient, but Naomi had always been jealous of Blake. She did not mention Eleanor's box. She did not mention the video. She did not mention the old bruises on her daughter's body. Martin shared the post only minutes later. He added one short sentence, cold enough to make old acquaintances nod in pity. Sometimes, a parent's kindness is twisted into evidence against them. In the hospital room, Naomi looked at the phone screen Grace had handed her. The comments appeared line after line. Some relatives said the family should be left alone. Some people wrote that money always revealed a person's true nature. Someone called it a shameful family drama story. Someone mentioned the inheritance drama, as if Naomi were a gold digger taking advantage of her grandmother's death. Naomi did not cry. She had cried too much during the years when no one heard her. This time, her eyes were dry enough to hurt. Across the city, Blake sat in his polished apartment, his laptop open in front of him. He was on the phone with a friend who worked in local media. His voice was low, calm, almost sorrowful. He said he did not want to attack his sister. He only wanted the truth to be seen fairly. In Blake's mind, fairness meant everyone standing on his side again, just like every other time. By afternoon, Blake appeared on a small business podcast. He wore a white shirt, his eyes carrying just the right amount of exhaustion. He talked about the pressure of families with property, about relatives who turned grief into a weapon, about being dragged into a story that sounded like cheap karma revenge stories online. Naomi heard that clip from Grace's phone. Blake said she had slipped. Blake said he had tried to catch her. Blake said Eleanor had not been mentally clear in the final months of her life. That last sentence made Naomi's uninjured hand tighten around the bedsheet, not because he had insulted her, but because he had dared to insult the only person who had ever protected her. Diane Holloway chose the perfect moment to step in as well. She did not post publicly right away. She messaged Noah privately first. She wrote that a woman carrying toxic family relationships would drag her future husband down with her. She wrote that if Noah married Naomi, he would spend his whole life trapped in scandal, lawsuits, and shame. Then she called Caroline, her voice soft as silk, saying she understood the pain of a mother whose daughter had lost control. Noah read those messages in his car outside the hospital. He had been sitting there for nearly an hour without daring to go in. He loved Naomi, but he had also been raised to avoid anything that made his family uncomfortable. His silence was not as cruel as Blake's, but it was still a closed door in front of Naomi at the exact moment she needed someone beside her. Meanwhile, Rachel Stone and prosecutor Amanda Fields refused to let the Pierce family control the story alone. Amanda was not loud. She understood that families like this survived by having a louder voice than the victim, so she chose to speak through documents. A short statement was sent to the local newspaper. The medical records showed that Naomi had multiple injuries at different stages. The video from Whitmore House was under investigation. Eleanor Pierce's will clause was directly connected to possible coercion over property. There were no exaggerated accusations, no unnecessary emotion, only the truth, laid out neatly like knives on a table. Public opinion began to shift. A woman named Melissa called Amanda's office. She had dated Blake for nearly a year. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. Blake had once pushed her into a glass door after a party. Afterward, he sent flowers, apologized, and told her not to turn a private matter into a scandal. A former co-worker of Blake's also sent an email, saying Blake had once pressured employees to change dates on land documents in order to mislead a partner. By evening, Aunt Vivian returned to the hospital with an old cloth bag. Inside were Naomi's notebooks, which Vivian had found in the small room behind the inn. Naomi had once hidden them beneath a loose floorboard under the bed. Each page was another time she had asked herself whether she was truly clumsy. The day she fell at the dock. The day she was trapped in the cold storage room. The day Blake squeezed her wrist so hard she could not hold a pen. After every entry, there was always the same sentence. Mom said it was an accident. Amanda read a few pages, then looked up. There was no pity in her eyes, only a cold, steady determination. We can use these. At the same time, Noah entered the room. He placed his phone on the table beside Naomi's bed. On the screen were Diane's messages, filled with sweet but poisonous advice. Naomi finished reading them and was not surprised. That hurt Noah more than if she had been angry. He apologized. He said he should have stood beside her sooner. Naomi looked at him for a long time. She saw real regret in his eyes, but the truth did not erase the wound immediately. Then from now on, she said, stand there quietly. Do not turn my pain into your redemption story. Noah nodded. This time, he said nothing more. That night, Blake was suspended from his real estate company. Whitmore House was ordered to have all property records sealed for investigation. Caroline deleted her old post, but it was too late. Screenshots were everywhere. The story she had tried to turn into a mother's sorrow began to become the thing she feared most. One of the best revenge stories did not need Naomi to destroy anyone. She only lay still in the bright white hospital room and let the evidence step out of the dark. And one by one, the Pierce family's lies began to bite into themselves. The day Naomi walked into court, she was no longer wearing black. She wore a pale blue dress, her left shoulder still stiff, her wrist still carrying a thin scar beneath a small bandage. To many people in the courtroom, she looked fragile. To Blake, that was what he was used to seeing. But he did not know that her fragility that day was no longer her weakness. It was proof that she had survived. Caroline sat behind Blake, her back straight, her makeup perfect, both hands resting on her purse as if she were attending a sad formal gathering rather than her own son's trial. Martin sat beside her in silence, his eyes avoiding Naomi. They still believed that if they looked calm long enough, everyone would forget what had happened in the greenhouse. Blake walked in wearing a navy blue suit. He did not look at Naomi right away. He looked at the jury first, like a salesman choosing the easiest customer to convince. In his mind, everything could still be saved. Just enough of an apology. A sentence about a misunderstanding, a few tears at the right moment. He had escaped consequences that way his entire life. Amanda Fields stood first. Her voice was not loud, but every sentence fell through the courtroom as clearly as a knock against glass. This was not an accident. This was a habit that had been hidden by a family for far too long. Naomi was called to testify. She placed her hand on the Bible to take the oath, her palm slightly cold. When she sat down, she saw Grace in the back row. Vivian sat beside her, her eyes red but never leaving Naomi. Noah was there too, sitting several rows away from his mother. Diane arrived late, wearing a light-colored coat, her face tight with irritation. She had not come to support Naomi. She had come to see whether this scandal would swallow the Holloway family too. Amanda asked Naomi about Blake. Naomi spoke slowly. She did not embellish. She did not scream. She spoke about the cold storage room, about the dock, about the wrists that hurt after graduation. About family dinners where everyone laughed when Blake called her a walking disaster. She spoke about Caroline, who always turned the word violence into a joke that went too far. She spoke about Martin, who always turned her fear into weakness. Blake's attorney stood with a very thin smile. He asked whether Naomi had ever been treated for anxiety, whether she had ever felt abandoned. Whether she was angry because Blake had been trusted by the family more than she had. Naomi looked straight at him. "Yes," she said. "I had anxiety because I never knew where he would hurt me next. I felt abandoned because I was abandoned inside my own home." The courtroom went silent. The attorney changed direction, asking whether she might have remembered things wrong, whether the fall in the greenhouse could have simply been an accident. Naomi did not raise her voice. "The camera does not remember wrong. My bones do not remember wrong either." That sentence made Blake lower his eyes. After Naomi, Melissa stepped forward. She was Blake's ex-girlfriend. Her voice trembled on the first sentence, but the more she spoke, the steadier she became. Blake had once pushed her into a glass door. Blake had once locked a room when she wanted to leave. Blake had once sent flowers and told her not to destroy his future. A former employee at the real estate company also testified that Blake had pressured people to alter documents. Grace confirmed Naomi's condition at the scene. Dr. Morris presented the old injuries in the cold language that no lie could soften. Then Rachel Stone opened the final folder. It was the part of the will that had never been fully read on the night of the greenhouse. Eleanor Pierce had left a special clause. If any family member threatened, coerced, or harmed Naomi in order to take control of Whitmore House, that person would lose every right connected to the property. Not only Blake, Caroline and Martin were also removed from any authority over the inn. Caroline finally lost her composure. She sprang to her feet and said Eleanor had been manipulated by Naomi, but Rachel only played the final recording. Eleanor's voice filled the courtroom, weak but clear. "If that child has to go to court to be believed, then I was right not to give this house to people who call silence family." No one said anything for several seconds. Blake was convicted of aggravated assault and fraud involving property documents. Martin faced further investigation for helping conceal records. Caroline received an order barring her from contacting Naomi and lost every right to interfere with the inn. When the judge's gavel came down, Blake no longer looked at Naomi. For the first time, he could not find anyone to blame. In the hallway outside, Diane stopped Naomi. She said she only wanted to protect her son. Naomi looked at her, tired but calm. "No. You wanted to protect your image." Noah stood behind her and heard every word. He did not ask Naomi to make a decision right away. He only said he would learn how to stand on the side of the truth, whether she still chose him or not. Naomi did not answer. She did not need to answer yet. A few weeks later, Naomi returned to Whitmore House. The house by the sea still smelled of old wood, salt, and camellias. Vivian had opened all the curtains. Light poured through the hallway, touching the staircase Naomi had once feared. She climbed one step at a time. Her shoulders still hurt. Her heart still carried fractures no one could see. But there was no sound of Blake behind her. No voice of Caroline telling her to be quiet. On the reception desk, she found Eleanor's old guest book. On the final page was a handwritten line. "A house is not always a family. Family is where you are safe." Naomi placed her hand over those words. She did not become a hero overnight. She simply became someone who had stopped asking for permission to hurt, to speak, and to live. And as the sea wind moved through the open doorway, she understood that the fall that had exposed her entire family was also the first step that led her back to herself. Naomi's story was not just about one fall. It was about years of silence, a family that protected the wrong person, and a truth that finally became too powerful to bury. Sometimes, the person everyone calls weak is the only one strong enough to expose what others are desperate to hide. If this story made you think about loyalty, betrayal, and toxic family relationships, leave a comment below. Who do you think betrayed Naomi the most? Blake, Caroline, Martin, or Diane? Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more emotional family drama stories.